China just gave its banks an order that Wall Street didn't see coming. No army, no warships, no declaration of war. Just one quiet instruction. And 70 years of American financial dominance is now on the clock. Here's what they don't want you to figure out. It didn't break as a major news story. No emergency broadcasts. No dramatic press conferences. Just a quiet directive flowing through the corridors of China's most powerful financial institutions. Chinese regulators walked into the country's biggest banks and delivered a mandate, not a suggestion, not a guideline, but a hard instruction. Reduce your dependency on the US dollar in cross-border transactions, hit a new minimum target, and do it now. Within hours, the ripple reached trading floors in New York, London, and Hong Kong. Not a wave of panic, something quieter and in many ways more unsettling. The kind of stillness that settles over a room when experienced people realize something fundamental has just shifted. Because what those analysts understood, and what most ordinary people scrolling through their feeds completely missed, is that this wasn't a technical banking adjustment. This was Beijing officially moving from defense to offense in the most consequential economic contest of our lifetime. For years, China absorbed American pressure. Tariffs, absorbed. Semiconductor export bans, adapted around. Technology restrictions, worked through. But somewhere in the last few years, the strategy changed. China stopped trying to survive American pressure and started building something designed to make that pressure irrelevant. What is unfolding right now isn't a trade argument between two large economies. It is the early architecture of a parallel global financial system. And whether you live in New York or Nairobi, in Berlin or Bangkok, what happens next will touch your life in ways most people aren't prepared for. Let's start from the beginning. To understand why China's move is so significant, you need to understand the system it is targeting. A system so deeply woven into the fabric of daily global commerce that most people have never stopped to question it. The US dollar has been the world's reserve currency since 1944, when Allied powers gathered at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, and agreed to rebuild the post-war global economy around American financial infrastructure. Every major currency was tied to the dollar. The dollar was tied to gold. And from that moment, any nation that wanted to buy oil, conduct international trade, or access global capital markets needed dollars to do it. The gold peg eventually ended in 1971. But the dollar's dominance only deepened. Today, approximately 58% of global foreign exchange reserves are held in US dollars. Oil is priced in dollars. International loans between countries that have no direct connection to America are still denominated in dollars. Trade between a Brazilian farmer and a Korean food company settled in dollars. This gives Washington something no military arsenal can replicate: the ability to project devastating economic power without firing a single shot, freeze assets, block transactions, lock entire nations out of the global financial system. America has used this capability with increasing confidence against Iran, against Russia, against Venezuela, against North Korea. For decades, no country had the economic weight to seriously challenge it. That era is ending. Before we go deep on China's response, we need to understand just how far American strategy has extended, because it goes well beyond tariffs and trading disputes. There is a law that has been dusted off and deployed with striking new intensity. The PRC is not a Developing Country Act, passed in 2023, directs American diplomats to pressure every major international institution, the World Bank, the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, the Asian Development Bank, to strip China of its developing nation classification. Why does that matter? Because developing nation status comes with serious economic advantages. Lower interest rates on international loans, longer repayment windows, more favorable trade terms, preferential treatment in multilateral negotiations. These benefits were designed to help poorer countries build the foundations of a competitive modern economy. The American argument is not without logic. China's GDP approaches $20 trillion. It has bullet trains, space rockets, and megacities that rival anything in the Western world. The developing nation label at this scale does look increasingly difficult to justify. But the real goal isn't fairness, it's strategy. Remove the cheap financing, raise the cost of China's international operations, slow the momentum. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has been traveling extensively, Europe, Asia, the Middle East, delivering a consistent message to every government he meets. Don't get too comfortable with China. When Spain signaled interest in deepening trade ties with Beijing, Bessent's response was strikingly direct. Getting too close to China, he reportedly told Spanish officials, would be like cutting their own throats. That is not the language of a country requesting cooperation. That is the language of a country demanding alignment. Bessent also delivered a pointed public critique of the IMF and World Bank, the twin pillars of global economic stability since the post-war settlement. Too focused on climate change, he said. Too distracted by social priorities that have nothing to do with their core financial mission. The implicit message was unmistakable. Realign with American strategic priorities, or risk losing Washington's political and financial backing. Then, in a move that undermined the entire diplomatic effort almost immediately, President Trump stepped in front of cameras and stated plainly that countries failing to give America what it wants in trade deals will face tariffs. No negotiation, no process. Economic punishment delivered unilaterally. Tariffs on Chinese goods have reached extraordinary levels, some categories exceeding 245%. Supply chains built over decades are being disrupted. Investors who enthusiastically back this administration have started expressing public concern about whether the strategy makes coherent sense. And here is the deep irony that strategists on both sides understand but rarely state openly. The more aggressively Washington weaponizes the dollar system, turning financial access into a tool of coercion rather than a neutral infrastructure of global commerce, the more urgently other countries feel compelled to build alternatives. America's pressure campaign may be doing more to accelerate China's rise than any policy Beijing designed on its own. When you demonstrate to the world that the rules only apply when they serve your interests, eventually the world starts looking for different rules. China's counter, the long game paying off. Here is what should genuinely surprise you. Despite the lobbying, the sanctions, the tariffs, the institutional pressure, the diplomatic warnings, China's international position has not weakened. By multiple meaningful measures, it has strengthened. How is that possible? Because Beijing has been executing a patient, decade-long strategy to build an alternative global architecture. Not reactive, not defensive, proactive, systematic, and, largely invisible to audiences whose understanding of China comes filtered through the lens of Western media. The numbers from 2025 alone tell a story that really demands attention. The Qatar Investment Authority, one of the world's most sophisticated and well-capitalized sovereign wealth funds and a close American security partner in the Gulf, recently purchased a 10% stake in a major Chinese asset management firm. A Middle Eastern powerhouse, operating well within the American security umbrella, making a deliberate strategic bet on China's financial future. That decision didn't happen by accident. China's trade with ASEAN, the bloc of Southeast Asian nations including Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines, reached $234 billion in just the first 3 months of 2025. A single quarter. The trajectory of that relationship reveals where the gravitational center of Asian commerce is moving, and it is not moving toward Washington. And then there is the Belt and Road Initiative, perhaps the most ambitious infrastructure program since the Marshall Plan, and arguably larger in scope than anything the post-war American-led order produced. Since its launch in 2013, China has channeled hundreds of billions of dollars into ports, railways, power plants, highways, and industrial zones across Asia, Africa, the Middle East, Latin America, and Europe. As of 2025, between 146 and 150 countries are participating. That is more than 3/4 of every nation on Earth. Some governments have faced American pressure to step back from specific Belt and Road projects. Some have, but many others have deepened their involvement because the practical calculus is straightforward. They need roads, they need electricity, they need ports, and China is building them when no one else is offering a credible alternative. Belt and Road is not just infrastructure. It is a relationship network. It is economic leverage. It is the physical foundation of a trading system that does not require American approval to function. The factory that runs the world. To understand the true depth of China's position, you have to move beyond finance and diplomacy and look at something more fundamental. Something that takes generations to build and cannot be replicated quickly, regardless of how much political will you have. Manufacturing capacity. China now produces approximately 30% of all manufactured goods on the planet. 1 in every 3 physical products made anywhere in the world originates from a Chinese factory. Industrial production represents around 26% of China's entire economy, a proportion that would be considered extraordinary in any advanced nation. China's GDP sits at roughly $19 trillion by conventional measure, second only to the United States. But measure using purchasing power parity, accounting for what money actually buys within the country, and China's economy exceeds $40 trillion. By that measure, it is already the largest economy on Earth. This manufacturing dominance gives Beijing structural resilience that financial sanctions and tariff walls cannot easily penetrate. When you make 1/3 of everything, the world carries an inherent dependency on your output. You can face pressure, you can absorb higher trade barriers, but you cannot simply be isolated. Meanwhile, manufacturing's share of the American economy has fallen to roughly 10%, the lowest proportion since World War II. This is not just an economic statistic, it is a national security vulnerability. The capacity to produce advanced components, precision electronics, sophisticated military systems. These capabilities determine, ultimately, who holds real power in the 21st century. How did China get here? A major part of the answer is Made in China 2025, a strategic industrial program launched in 2015 with a clear and declared objective. Not just to maintain manufacturing dominance, but to move it upmarket. To transform China from the world's low-cost assembler of basic goods into a global leader in advanced technology industries. The targeted sectors told you exactly where Beijing was aiming: electric vehicles, commercial aviation, industrial robotics, semiconductor production, medical technology. The results are undeniable. China now produces more than 60% of the world's electric vehicles. It dominates global solar panel manufacturing. In 2023 alone, Chinese factories installed over 300,000 industrial robots, more than any other country on Earth. These aren't labor-intensive assembly floors anymore. China's industrial zones are sophisticated, highly automated ecosystems built around tight supply chain integration and production speeds that Western competitors consistently struggle to match. In Shenzhen, a company can move from concept to working prototype in days. That isn't a wage advantage. Factory workers in Shanghai and Shenzhen now earn salaries comparable to parts of Europe. That is an infrastructure and integration advantage, and it is very difficult to replicate. The walls America built, and why they're cracking. Washington's strategy has been described as Fortress America. Erect barriers, impose tariffs, restrict technology exports, form exclusive alliances with friendly nations, reduce China's access to global supply chains, shrink Beijing's international footprint. The ambition is understandable. The execution is running into a wall of reality. America's most important allies are deeply, inextricably embedded in Chinese supply chains. German automobile manufacturers depend on Chinese-made components. Japanese electronics firms have production networks threading directly through Chinese factories. South Korean technology companies, Taiwanese semiconductor producers, Australian commodity exporters. The entanglements are everywhere, running deep, and they developed because China offered the most competitive combination of cost, scale, and capability the global market has ever produced. Full decoupling is not a realistic policy option. It is a theoretical position that dissolves the moment you examine the actual trade data. In 2024, China exported goods worth approximately $3.6 trillion. Its trade surplus approached $1 trillion. These are not the numbers of a country being successfully contained. These are the numbers of a country sitting at the center of how the world's economy actually functions. Chinese companies, meanwhile, keep advancing. Huawei, a company the United States spent years trying to cripple by cutting its access to foreign semiconductor technology, developed domestic chip production capabilities that surprised American intelligence analysts. The company Washington tried to reduce to irrelevance is now producing competitive advanced processors without foreign inputs. BYD, the Chinese electric vehicle manufacturer, now sells more cars globally than Tesla. It is expanding aggressively into European markets, across Southeast Asia, throughout South America, and into Africa. Despite significant tariff barriers in certain Western markets, its combination of competitive pricing and rapidly improving technology continues to generate market share gains. The tariffs are imposing real costs on Chinese exporters, but they are also imposing real costs on American consumers, and they are not reversing the trajectory. The assault on the dollar. Now we arrive at the part of this story with the most profound long-term implications. The People's Bank of China recently issued a mandate requiring Chinese financial institutions to increase the minimum share of cross-border trade transactions settled in yuan from 25% to 40%. Not a suggestion, not an incentive program, a compliance requirement. Here is what that means in numbers you can actually feel. China's total goods trade in 2024 was valued at approximately $6.8 trillion. Currently, around 30% settles in yuan. If Chinese banks reach the new 40% target, more than $3 trillion in annual trade would flow through financial channels that completely bypass the US dollar. $3 trillion per year, removed from dollar-denominated systems. The downstream effects ripple through every corner of global finance. Reduced international demand for dollars, growing global appetite for yuan, capital flows redirecting toward Chinese financial markets. Goldman Sachs has estimated that every 1% appreciation in the yuan's value could lift Chinese equity markets by approximately 3%. That represents a direct, measurable transfer of financial influence from Western capital markets toward Chinese ones. And this is the starting point, not the destination. If even a fraction of trade currently settled in other currencies transitions to yuan over the next decade, China's financial system evolves from a regional presence into a genuine global alternative to the dollar architecture, not replacing it overnight, but competing with it seriously and credibly for the first time since 1944. Beijing is not just talking about challenging the dollar, it is mandating the infrastructure required to do it. The battle for the future, and why it affects you. Let's pull the full picture together. Because what is unfolding across trade, manufacturing, finance, and diplomacy is not a collection of separate disputes. It is a single, coordinated campaign. BYD's global price war illustrates the pattern perfectly. Discounts of 10 to 30% on electric vehicles that were already priced below Western competition. For every EV manufacturer trying to establish global scale, this is an existential competitive challenge. But beyond cars, this is a battle for control of the technologies that will define the next 50 years. Battery systems, vehicle software, charging infrastructure, semiconductor integration, supply chains for the critical minerals that power the clean energy transition. Whoever dominates electric vehicles today is positioning to lead artificial intelligence-driven mobility, autonomous systems, and smart infrastructure tomorrow. China is currently winning that race by a margin that is difficult to dismiss. The same pattern is visible in solar energy, industrial robotics, telecommunications infrastructure, and high-speed rail. In each sector, Chinese companies, supported by government industrial policy, subsidized financing, and the scale advantages of the world's largest manufacturing base, are creating structural competitive challenges that Western rivals have not yet found effective answers to. Washington's response has imposed real friction, but history offers a sobering lesson. When major powers face sustained containment, they rarely comply. They adapt. They find alternatives. And sometimes, driven by the urgency that pressure creates, they innovate faster than they would have under comfortable conditions. The semiconductor export controls designed to freeze China's chip development may be remembered a decade from now as the policy that forced Beijing to build a domestic semiconductor industry that no longer needs foreign technology at all. Closing, one system is ending, another is beginning. Here's the truth that runs underneath everything in this story. For 70 years, the global economy has operated on a single set of financial rails built, maintained, and ultimately controlled by the United States. The dollar at the center. American institutions setting the rules. American approval required for full participation in the system. China is building different rails, not to destroy the existing system overnight. That is not the strategy. The strategy is to construct a functional, credible alternative, one that gives enough countries a genuine choice that the American system loses its monopoly on the world's financial infrastructure. Over 150 countries connected through Belt and Road. A yuan settlement mandate rerouting trillions in annual trade. Gulf sovereign wealth funds placing strategic bets on Chinese financial institutions. Southeast Asian trade growing at rates that reshape the region's economic center of gravity. Technology champions advancing despite the full weight of American pressure. This is not a country retreating. The real question is not whether China can absorb American pressure. The evidence suggests it already is, not without cost, not without difficulty, but without being forced off its fundamental course. The real question is the one every government on Earth is currently wrestling with privately. When two global systems exist, one anchored in Washington, one in Beijing, which one do you choose? And what happens to the countries that try to stay in both? Because here is what history tells us with uncomfortable consistency. When the architecture of global power shifts, and it has shifted before, from the British pound to the American dollar, from European colonial systems to the post-war American-led order, the transition is never clean, never predictable, and never without consequence for ordinary people whose lives are shaped by decisions made in rooms they'll never enter. The order China gave its banks was one brick. But bricks become walls, and walls become foundations. The world you've known your entire life was built on one financial foundation. Right now, in real time, another one is being laid. The only question is whether you'll understand what's happening while it's still happening, or only after it's already done. Outro. If this video shifted how you see the headlines, if it made the trade wars, the tariffs, the diplomatic standoffs suddenly make sense in a way they didn't before, then you're exactly where you need to be. This channel exists for one reason: to take the stories that actually matter, the ones shaping your economy, your opportunities, and your future, and tell them with the clarity and depth they deserve. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, because this story has more chapters coming, and each one moves faster than the last. Don't get left behind. See you in the next one.